Media. And Alex, we are sitting here and Senior Bowl practices are going on right now as we speak. And I think this is a place I wanted to start. We're going to eventually get into Deshaun Watson. And as we said on Twitter, please drop your questions in the comments section if you're on YouTube. And we will get to as many as we possibly can once we get at some of these other big picture topics out of the way. But Alex, starting with the Senior Bowl, which I would like to talk about as much as we can, because I think that this is, you can't understate how important this event is, not only for the history of the Patriots. I think the number is 46 players since 2008 have been drafted that went to the Senior Bowl. Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, is a former Patriot front office scout. So this is the Patriots scouting Super Bowl. It's one that they've always leaned on. And now in this year, without the combine, an in-person combine at least, and a lot of pro days getting canceled as well, this might be the only time that teams have in-person interaction with these prospects before the draft in April. So who are some of the guys? And I think before we get into some of the guys that have stood out to you that maybe are a little bit more under the radar, let's talk about our guy, Mac Jones, because
can I make one point on the Senior Bowl real quick?
Yeah.
What happened to North-South? I'm trying to keep track of who's practicing when, and we got this American National. Yeah. Why did they get rid of North-South? So much more complicated. Simple thing. And it rant over.
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess we'll have to get Jim Nagy on here and figure out why they changed that there. But I wanted to talk about Mac Jones, because I think what's really interesting about the conversation with Mac Jones is that I constantly hear about things that he can't do. Right? That he's not mobile enough, that he doesn't have a big enough arm, that he played on an offense that was absolutely stacked at Alabama. And how much can we really take away when he's throwing to 3 first-round picks at Bama and all this stuff? And every time this guy steps on a football field, whether it's at Alabama, the national championship game, now down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, he balls out. And I think it's kind of crazy to think that every single time we talk about him, it's what can't he do, when meanwhile, every time he plays and every time I see him play, it's really extremely impressive.
Well, first off, every time you talked about him, it was what can't he do. I have been chewing your ear off about this guy.
You're right.
Since October. So let's get that there. Second of all, the really unique thing about Mac Jones, and I wrote this, I summed up his first day at the Senior Bowl. You can check that out right now on 985thesportshub.com, is that how many guys go to an all-star showcase and the talent around them gets worse from where they were, right? Mac Jones is at an all-star game, and he is in, talent-wise, a worse offense than he had at Alabama. And I think that's big because maybe the biggest knock on Mac Jones, it's not a fair one, but the biggest knock publicly on Mac Jones among all else has been he's throwing a Heisman winner, he's throwing Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, whatever, even though he was out for most of the year, whatever. Well, now he's not, right? And, you know, I'm not saying Trey Watson's not a good player from Georgia that he threw. He had that one great pass that everybody was throwing, highlight one of many, but he's not throwing to Devonta Smith. He's not throwing to Jalen Waddle. He's throwing to dudes from Western Michigan. And he's still, like you said, balling out. So I think, and he's the only one of the top 6 quarterbacks competing this week. He didn't need to do that. If he didn't show up, I don't think anybody would have said anything. He just won a national championship. He just played into January. He's doing a ton for his draft stock right now. I saw somebody just ask about the second round. That was unlikely at best, I think, given the significance of the Senior Bowl this year, like you mentioned, with no combine. I think that, you know, this is the nail in the coffin of any hopes of getting Mac Jones in the second round. If you want to talk about, can they maybe trade down in the first and still get him? We'll see what happens with Stafford and Watson, and maybe there's a conversation to be had there. But yeah, he is just absolutely, he is game stock. His stock is going straight up, and nobody's going to come in and stop the Patriots from drafting him. The stock's only going up when it comes to Mac Jones.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about it is that he does all of the things well, the little things well that we always give quarterbacks credit for once they get to the pros. And it's the big picture things that maybe there are question marks about. Like I mentioned earlier, arm talent and mobility, ability to handle pressure. Those are things that people point to with Mac Jones as concerns. But then when you watch him play, he throws with great accuracy to all three levels, great touch to all three levels, great timing and anticipation to all three levels. And it's kind of funny because I feel like a lot of the time we look at these draft prospects as tools-based prospects, like a guy like I hate to use this comparison because he's obviously not a good NFL quarterback, but somebody like a Mitchell Trubisky, he comes in and he can run, he's got a great arm, and everybody sits there back and says, oh, we'll teach the rest of the stuff. Don't worry about it, right? Like, we'll figure out how to get him to look like a natural quarterback in the pocket and be able to see the field and throw with good timing and, his footwork and his drops. So we'll coach all of that. But you can't coach his arm and his mobility. Well, I think that's sort of a bad way of looking at it, honestly, when you evaluate these quarterback prospects, because Mac Jones looks like a quarterback. He's been a quarterback since he was in elementary school. He's a guy that knows the position, feels the position, understands it, understands the nuances, and he plays the game like a polished NFL veteran, even though he's not even in the NFL yet. So, yeah, we can sit here and talk about the fact that he doesn't have the biggest arm in the draft. He certainly doesn't have an arm like Trey Lance does or Justin Fields does and Zach Wilson, and that's all true. But he does so many of the intangible little things right and so many of the physical little things right that you just sort of look at it and say, man, he just looks like he knows how to play quarterback. And there's something to be said for that, more so than maybe all the physical gifts that we fall in love with this time of year. And the conversation is no longer, is Mac Jones a first round pick? Now the conversation is, how high in the first round is he going to go?
Right.
I don't think he's going to sneak into the top 10, but I think New England at 15 is really where the conversation probably starts from. Maybe San Francisco at 12 can even get into this conversation if the other four quarterbacks are gone. But we're definitely talking about a first round quarterback now. And this is following a similar trajectory.
You are talking about a first-round quarterback now. You were saying, yeah, he's good, but I wouldn't take him there. Asset management. 3 weeks ago you said that.
He's gone on his 15. I still don't love it at 15. I don't, because we're still looking at a guy, Alex, that you need to surround him with talent, right? You need to have a lot of people around him, and he's not this like incredible, quarterback from a physical standpoint that's going to overcome bad weapons. But at the same time, like I said, a lot of the boxes that I just said he checks: accuracy, poise, understanding of coverage and reading coverages, anticipation. Those are Patriot attributes. Those are things that everybody that gets into my mentions all the time clamoring for Jimmy G. Mac Jones is a younger, healthier version of Jimmy G and does all the things that Jimmy G does well. So it's a really interesting conversation with Mac Jones. I'm sure we're very far from done from having that talk. So let's move on to some other guys that you've caught your eye at the Senior Bowl, guys that are maybe flying a little bit more under the radar.
Yeah, so a guy I really wasn't too aware of him until this week, but Des Fitzpatrick is a wide receiver from Louisville, and I've seen him, and I kind of looked, I was like, oh, I missed this guy. Like, he's got to be like a day 2, day 3 prospect. Like, I go on and I look, and they're talking about him being undrafted and just a guy with great speed, great twitch. He's not a big guy. He's kind of cut from the Philip Dorsett cloth. He's not a guy like I'm saying they should go up and trade up to get. But, if they don't want to invest heavily in wide receiver this year, if they want to double dip on day 3 with the wide receiver this year, if Jameer Byrd, if they don't want to bring him back, like, I think he's really fast. He's really fast, and he's not just like straight line fast. He's quick. He can change direction in and out, this and that. And he's just been competing really hard, I think, at the Senior Bowl. He's been, some guys I think are dogging it. Some guys are dogging it, or it's getting to them. And you had that corner from Washington. I think it was Keith. I have the roster right here. Keith Taylor. I don't know if you saw this yesterday. He just like laid a wide receiver out on a one-on-one drill because he was frustrated. Like, he can't be doing that. No, but I think, again, out of Louisville, Des Fitzpatrick, he's kind of stood out to me a little bit. He's kind of popped. I thought he's looked good. And then a guy that stood out, like, he stood out good. A guy that stood out, another guy is Damar Hamlin, who is a safety from Pittsburgh, and not the safety from Pittsburgh. Paris Ford is the big guy. Everybody's talked about him. I don't think he's a look for the Patriots because he's essentially drafting Kyle Duggar twice. Damar Hamlin's a deep safety. He can play some corner as well. And it's really hard to gauge him because you watch his tape and he does some odd things, especially when it comes to zone coverage. But everybody on the defense sort of does the same odd things. And there were some issues this year with Patrick Narduzzi and the defense. And you wonder if it was just coaching. You see him out there, he'll go out, he'll have a great rep on one play, and then the next play he trips over his own feet. And it's like you can kind of tell he knows what he needs to do, and he can do it, but he can't do it consistently. So the Patriots need a deep safety. I think a guy who can also play corner is intriguing. And when you have a guy that has shown flashes, that's the kind of guy, I don't know if he lasts to like late into day 3, but if he's sitting there in the 5th or 6th round and you look at him and you think, we might be able to kind of round off some of the edges, he's kind of proven to me. What I'm seeing is that, I looked at the tape and I thought, nah, that's not the guy for me. And now I look at it and I think, well, I wonder how much of it was Pat Narduzzi. I wonder how much of it was just bad coaching. And can the Patriots kind of knock some of those bad habits out? And can he become a Daron Harmon type of player? But then again, he's a safety who's supposed to go in the 5th round. So Bill's going to take him at 45. So
there are a couple of guys down there in Mobile right now that have that Bill Belichick defensive back in the 2nd round written all over him. Ifeadi Melifonwu, Obi's brother, is another one of them. Just a rocked up.
He's looked good though.
Yeah, he's looked great. He's a really good athlete, corner, maybe potentially some safety versatility in the NFL. Exactly the Belichick pedigree, and you do worry about 46. And if Melifonwu is on the board, I'm going to give some love to one of the offensive linemen in a second. But first and foremost, Demetric Felton, the running back from UCLA,
yes,
who I know people are going to sit here and say, Evan's talking about a running back. Why are we talking about a running back? Well, he's actually more of like a wide receiver that played running back in college. That's probably going to be sort of a wide receiver running back hybrid in the NFL. And if you look at the Patriots free agents coming up, there is a chance. I don't think it's very likely that they lose both James White and Rex Burkhead, but there is a chance that they're going to have to fill that 3rd down passing back role in those sub packages. And I just love what I've seen out of Felton because he's ran some ridiculous routes, especially in one-on-one, some really explosive routes. And he's not a guy that played a whole lot of wide receiver in college, and he's already flashing these wide receiver skills in the Senior Bowl. So you think you start working with him a little bit more at that position, and he's really going to start to take off. It's sort of maybe a future need, and I know they really like J.J. Taylor in the building, so maybe he's a guy that factors into that 3rd down back role. But if they were to lose a guy like James White, then I do think that they need to start thinking about that in a similar way to they need to start thinking about that deep safety role too.
I would just add 2 real quick. James White's going to be 30. Rex Burkhead's going to be 32. Yeah. We know they like to get the running backs in a year early. So even if you bring James White back, I mean, the oldest running back in the league last year, besides Frank Gore, because he's like a freak, you really don't see many running backs in the league past 31, 32 years old. So even if James White does come back, it's probably on a 1-year deal, and then you get him working with Felton. So no, I absolutely think, people don't want to hear this. I'm looking at running back as a need this year for the Patriots in the draft. I don't think a day 1 or even day 2 need, and not getting another guy like a Sony Michel or a Damian Harris, but I think J.J. Taylor's an interesting prospect, but if you can kind of get another guy to compete with him and double your odds of finding James White's replacement, if you can find that guy, and maybe Felton doesn't go there. This isn't Felton's, it's just in general in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. Yeah, I think they should take a running back this year and a guy cut from Felton's mold. So I think that's a very fair guy to look at when you're talking about the Patriots.
Yeah, the guy that somebody just dropped in the chat is Antonio Gibson on Washington football team. Exactly same type of player. A guy that's really a kind of a Swiss Army knife. You can put him in the backfield, or you can have him run routes on the perimeter in the slot, matchup type of weapon, and he had a really successful rookie season. The other guy that I got to talk about is really just the darling of the Senior Bowl this week right now is Quinn Meinerz, from Wisconsin Whitewater.
D3, baby. Let's go.
And it's really, to me, it's like
shirt rolled up.
It's the same story as Kyle Duggar last year, right? It's the same story. You got this guy from a D3 school. Kyle Duggar is obviously D2, but is a D3 product that's coming in here at the Senior Bowl and absolutely dominating the competition. He's probably going to be an interior guy, so maybe not somebody the Patriots are going to have technically high on their board of needs. but it reminds me a lot of Ali Marpet, who a few years ago made the jump from Hobart, I believe it was, and to the NFL, and has had a really great NFL career. This guy is mean. He's nasty. He's delivered some pancakes. I mean, that he has really been very impressive.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I mean, you compare. Was it you or somebody in the chat compared him to Duggar? I think that was you.
Yeah.
In that, and the tricky thing about these guys is they haven't played football in a year. Right, because there was no D3 season this year, and that goes as high as some of the 1AA guys. You know, the guys from North Dakota State. I know there's a tackle there from North Dakota State. He got one game in that showcase game for Trey Lance, but you know that's going to affect their stocks. And the Patriots might need a center, right? If David Andrews doesn't come back, and I think he will, but if he doesn't come back, and Landon Dickinson's a name that's been thrown out, and rightfully so. I think he's you know, an elite center prospect, but if you have to use a first round pick on Landon Dickerson versus you go and you get this guy in maybe the third round, like that, I think makes a ton of sense. So do we start taking some of the
questions? We're taking some of your questions now. There's so many questions in the chat about Deshaun Watson, so we can just kind of talk about it all.
Not happening.
It's not happening for so many reasons. I saw Bill Barnwell on ESPN wrote a column with a bunch of different trade scenarios, and the Patriots are giving up 2 first-round picks, a couple other mid-round picks, N'Keal Harry and J.C. Jackson, all for Deshaun Watson. I'm not really sure what the Texans would want with N'Keal Harry, but that's besides the point. This is not happening for so many reasons. I think the biggest reason is the rest of the league might riot if Nick Caserio trades him to the Patriots. And I really mean that this could be something that goes all the way up to the commissioner's office if this is pulled off. And we could be in for a veto situation if enough of the league is pissed off enough about Caserio leaving the Patriots and then throwing his old boss a bone, like a giant bone, and trading him to Deshaun Watson. I think the best case scenario.
And keep in mind, Watson has to accept it too.
Right. So that's the sort of caveat, right? Is where does Deshaun Watson want to go? And he's going to have complete control over where he goes because of that no trade clause. So the only way that he ends up in New England is if Deshaun Watson says, I want to go play for the Patriots. That's the team. Figure it out.
Doesn't feel likely right now.
Doesn't feel like that's going to happen. So the one, I think, you know, bone that Nick Caserio could throw Bill Belichick would be trading him nowhere near the AFC East, where 2 teams, the Dolphins and the Jets, look like they're right at the top of the list for both Watson and the fact that they can put together those trade packages.
Right. And again, if he wants to go to one of those teams, there's really nothing Caserio can do. Like, Caserio's not in a position to throw Belichick a bone. And somebody just asked, would he go to the AFC? It's not up to the Texans. If Jacksonville wants him, I saw that floated today, right? Like if he wanted to go to Jacksonville and play them twice a year, if he wanted to go to Indy and play the Texans twice a year, which he might, because he clearly has a grudge. Jacksonville, Houston can't do anything. So it is what it is. Somebody said, and it does sound like it's going to be the Jets or Dolphins. I'm hoping it's the Dolphins just because the Jets just don't deserve to be good. They just don't. Their fans don't. The team doesn't. The Dolphins, I can take whatever. I saw there's a question about Stidham, asking if we're done with Stidham. Is anybody not done with Stidham?
We can get to that. I want to get to that one in a second, but just lastly on Watson, I think the biggest thing that you look at is this can really be a situation where the Texans can surprisingly set themselves up extremely nicely in one of these deals. And if I'm Houston, the team I'm definitely calling is the Miami Dolphins, because they can send you the number 3 overall pick and Tua Tagovailoa for Deshaun Watson, and that's a very fair trade. You know, I think that's a very fair trade for both sides, and they can have their quarterback of the future and Tua. They then have the number 3 overall pick. Maybe they take Penny Sewell there, or they take a receiver there, or something like that to help out Tua, and all of a sudden you're looking like a team that has a little bit more of a brighter future than you would think for a team that has to ship out their 25-year-old franchise quarterback. Other than that deal, for Houston, I think that this is going to be a monster loss for the Texans. But if they can somehow pull Tua out of this, then maybe that does salvage things just a little bit. That at least you have a young quarterback that you can be, a little bit excited about.
Well, I mean, if they're getting and you kind of touched on it, if they're getting the 2nd or 3rd pick, you'd hope they're excited about a guy like Justin Fields or Trey Lance or Zach Wilson too. But I mean, I would love to see Deshaun Watson just get spiteful and refuse to waive his no trade clause until all Houston's getting back is like a 7th-round pick.
Well, that would be in his best interest, right? Like, you don't want to clean out the team you're going to out of all their assets.
Right.
So technically, I've always thought about that, right? Is like, it's kind of weird to me whenever we see a big trade go down. And I remember the biggest one was like Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks all those years ago. The Knicks traded like 10 first-round picks for Carmelo, and they could never get him any help because they didn't have any assets to give up to get him another star to play alongside him. That's how I feel like with Deshaun Watson is it's in his best interest to make sure that this trade is not crazy. Right, it isn't 3 first-round picks plus. That's why I feel like the Dolphins are such a good landing spot, because Tua is essentially a first-round pick in himself, right? So you get the number 3, you get Tua. There's your 2 first-round picks. Maybe the Dolphins throw in some extra stuff there, extra filler to make the deal a little bit more sweet.
And let's just point out, if it becomes that's Houston trading back for their own first-round pick. Yeah. So that pick from 2 years ago, help me out here if I get it wrong. I'm trying to run through the math in my head. That trade essentially becomes Deshaun Watson for what? Laramie. It becomes Deshaun Watson for Laramie Tunsil and Kenny Stills in a 4th. Is that what that trade becomes?
Pretty much.
That's ridiculous. Right. That's awesome. It's ridiculous.
The other side of this, and then we're going to move on and take more of your questions, but the other side of this with Deshaun Watson is that his contract in 2021 is extremely affordable for the team that's going to acquire him. He's only due $10.5 million in cash the way that the deal is structured in 2021. So a very low cap number for the team that's going to acquire him next year. So if you go to a team, if you're Watson that is flush in cap space, that is definitely something that I think is going to be really attractive to him. All right, so let's get to some of these other questions. Let's go back to that officially done with Stidham question and just get this conversation out of the way. We both, I think, speaking for the both of us, are done with Jared Stidham as an option for the Patriots.
Can you be done if you never start? Like, do you remember my reaction on draft night? I don't know if we have the video, but you were sitting next to me. I think my exact reaction when they drafted Stidham was, I realized this is also going to be an audio podcast. I threw my head back. Yeah,
the radio guy doing visuals here.
What more? I was a video guy once. What more? Like, I keep hearing like, we haven't really seen him. And yeah, I get that he never got like a full week as a starter, but 1, the team has seen him a lot more than you have in practice. And 2, we've seen everything there was no indication he ever earned a full week as a starter. At this point, saying we need to see more of Stidham or don't trade Stidham because you haven't really seen him yet, you might as well make the same argument for Jake Dolgala at this point. Like, I don't know. It's time to, all of last year I had to bite my tongue because the argument was Cam Newton versus Jared Stidham when the reality was the answer was neither.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And Jared Stidham, I think the biggest thing that you saw with him in camp last year, and I know it's just training camp and we didn't really get to see him out on the field all that much, but it's just a lack of sort of progress of any kind, of a lack of improvement. He's always thrown a nice ball, right? And when he's well protected and he has an option to open receiver, he can throw the ball down the field and put it in a good spot. And that's something I think that we fell in love with, and is not we, but other people did in his rookie preseason, fell in love with a little bit, was the ball placement down the field. And it is nice, but at the same time, he's still holding onto the ball for too long. He's still throwing too many interceptions or interception-worthy passes. His processing speed, his decision-making, none of that has even come close to improving everything that we have seen. He has I know it's a very small sample size, but he has one of the highest interception rates in NFL history for the amount of passes.
Highest since 1971 of any quarterback to throw as many passes he has.
That's pretty much tells you everything.
There you go. Yeah,
it really does. Okay, let's get to some of these other ones. I want to talk about.
Somebody asked about Brissett.
We're going to get back to the quarterback.
You want to go back to Brissett? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to get back to some of these QB questions. And okay. I'll answer it now. Think there's any chance of Jared Goff, Jimmy G, or Jacoby Brissett? So Jared Goff, right off the top, it's very difficult for the Rams unless they trade him to get out of that Jared Goff contract this season. I think it kind of alleviates itself a little bit next year, but this year it's an albatross of a contract. It's a really bad contract that they signed him to. So I don't know if a team is going to bail out the Rams. And why would a team bail out the Rams, right? Yeah, I just don't see that scenario happening. Jimmy G is an interesting domino effect for me, right? Like if the Niners end up upgrading at quarterback and make Jimmy G available, I guess you could see that. But my big thing with Jimmy G is if they're going to bring him back, I need somebody else with him, right? Like I'm not just hitching all of my wagon to Jimmy G. I need Jimmy G and then maybe Kyle Trask in the second round, or maybe it's Jamie Newman on day 3 or developmental prospect, somebody that's a little bit more exciting for me right now than Jared Stidham, something that gives me more than that, because I'm not sure Jimmy G is going to stay healthy. So I need something behind him.
So that leads me perfectly into my point. And everybody is talking about the Jimmy G reunion. Not enough people are talking about the Jacoby Brissett reunion. Yeah. I would, if it came down to those two. And like you said, Garoppolo's probably only a domino effect. San Francisco's not giving him up unless they either get Stafford, maybe get into the Watson conversation, or trade into the top 5 and get one of like the elite quarterback prospects. They're not just giving him up to move on. They have their roster in place. They need a quarterback. But Brissett, to me, like the most important thing for a quarterback is availability. Yeah. Garoppolo doesn't play. And then on top of that, the second most important thing is ball security. Garoppolo constantly turns the ball over. So if it comes down to those two guys, and what's the big draw? Why does everybody want Garoppolo, right? He knows the system. You don't have to really change things. Things are like here.
Belichick loved him. Loved. I say that in past tense, right? I don't know what Belichick thinks of him now, but we are also confident in Bill Belichick's evaluations of quarterbacks, that when Bill was praising him so much when they traded him, I think that gave people peace of mind that Bill thinks that this guy's good enough to be the answer. And
either Bill was wrong or he was lying, because he's not. But my point being, most of the talking points around why people want Garoppolo back also apply to Jacoby Brissett, who isn't made of glass. And I don't know that, I mean, is there a monumental difference between the two on tape?
I think Jacoby Brissett's got a better arm, honestly.
Exactly.
More playmaking.
Right. So I just think, I'd rather have Mac Jones. I'd rather have the younger guy for sure. But if we're just talking Garoppolo, and that's when I originally saw the question, I thought it was which one, not just asking about any of them. I would rather have Brissett over Garoppolo. And I think he's also going to cost less, so that gives you more cap freedom. The only reason you want Garoppolo back is a narrative thing. Yeah. That is the only advantage Garoppolo has, and the narratives don't actually mean anything. So, give me Brissett over Garoppolo, absolutely. Is Brissett better than New? I mean, I'm assuming that's not career-wise. Like,
right now,
2021, who's going to be a better quarterback? It might be Jacoby Brissett. I think that's a very fair question.
The thing about Jacoby, when I went back to study him from that, what was it, 2019, that he started some games for Indianapolis, is he is a very smooth delivery. He's a guy that throws with good mechanics for the most part, has a nice release, looks like he's throwing the football and it's not awkward or uncomfortable for him.
He looks like a quarterback, like you said with Mac Jones before.
Right. Whereas with Cam, we saw the mechanics, especially the lower body, but even the upper body mechanics too, and his arm slot and his release and things like that. That was a disaster last year. It was cleaned up in the beginning of the year. He got COVID. We know the whole story, right? But the problem is that I see a much smoother thrower with Jacoby Brissett. I think it's a little bit unfair to Cam because of how successful he's been to say that Jacoby Brissett is better than Cam Newton, but I think that he's a cleaner thrower of the football than Cam. He doesn't bring that athleticism that Cam does to the same degree. I think that Jacoby Brissett is not a mobile quarterback by the traditional sense. He can move around a little bit, but he's not typically mobile. So I like the idea of Jacoby Brissett too. The one that I threw out earlier in the offseason, Mac Jones and Jacoby Brissett together, Jacoby as sort of
like that,
Mac Jones as the young guy. That sort of pairing, I think, is a decent, I wouldn't call it plan A, but it's, the most realistic, maybe plan B or C, right? It's right up there. I personally would like them to go a little bit higher with the ceiling, but I think that that's not a bad option if that has to be it. I wanted to get, we're going to get back to some of these Stafford questions, but first I wanted to get to these Stephon Gilmore trade questions.
Yeah, can we rapid fire some of these? Because we're getting some good ones here.
Yeah, so I wanted to get to these Gilmore trade questions because I'm really fascinated by a lot of this, because I think people put Gilmore Gilmore and all these trades for like Deshaun Watson and Matthew Stafford just because he's the name brand, right? He's the all-pro corner and he has some value to him. Those types of teams, though, the Lions, they don't need Stephon Gilmore right now, right? They're rebuilding teams. What are you acquiring a 31-year-old corner? If you're Houston, why do you want Stephon Gilmore when you're a total rebuild, right? It just doesn't add up, and you're going to have to pay him too. So that doesn't add up to me. But the team that's really interesting that could involve Gilmore is the Dallas Cowboys at number 10. If the Patriots fall in love with a quarterback in this draft and they need to trade up to go get that guy, then 10 to the Cowboys with Gilmore as part of the package to sweeten the deal. Dallas is a team that's probably going to try to hit the ground running next year.
Assuming they keep Dak Prescott, which again,
I don't know why you're not assuming that.
I banged the table before because it's Jerry Jones, because he's a lunatic. That's why. But there's another, and there's a lot of reasons why this one wouldn't make sense. But I can't, and it doesn't make the most sense, but I can't like totally shake it, right? Is the Miami Dolphins if they get Deshaun Watson, because it's a scheme familiarity, right? Brian Flores knows Stephon Gilmore. They're a team that if you get Deshaun Watson, you want to contend for a Super Bowl. Like, you're going all in. You're not getting Deshaun Watson and then having a year or two ramp up. You're just going for it. Gilmore helps you do that. Again, he likes
a lot of money at the cornerback position for that team. Byron Jones, Xavier Howard, already on that roster.
The defensive coach. I mean, he's going to, and look, there's a real chance that the three quarterbacks they're facing next year, Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, and either Zach Wilson or Justin Fields. I mean, you're going to be facing elite quarterbacks. So I know it's the division, and I know that kind of makes it weird, but Miami, right? You're going to trade the third pick for Watson. Then they have, what is it, the 15th pick? No, Patriots have the 15th. They have, is it 18? 18. Thank you.
So they're already picking Najee Harris at 18, and we can just walk the card up now.
But here's the thing, like, maybe they don't want to lock into a first round contract. Maybe that's a way that they can kind of manage their cap, right? And I know you ultimately end up spending more money for Stephon Gilmore, but instead of putting a first round contract on a guy you don't necessarily know is going to produce as good as you think he is, nothing's guaranteed. You go out and you get Stephon Gilmore, you get a guy who you know is going to help your team, and you can manage the contract a little bit more the way you want to, even though it's going to cost you more money. So, like, it's kind of out of the box. I don't think it's likely, but I can't, there's enough of a logic train there where I can't totally shoot it down.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. Ryan Fitzpatrick, yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to just see, like, as a fan, I'd love to watch him on my team. I think he'd be a ton of fun to watch. I don't want Ryan Fitzpatrick and being done with it, right? We talked about pairing a veteran with a rookie, and the Patriots are going to have a first-year QB coach, right? So you want somebody who can go in and really help the young guy. So if you draft a Mac Jones, I think Fitzpatrick is a phenomenal teacher. I think having him with a Mac Jones, if you go move up and you get Trey Lance, right, something like that, then yes, I'm all in on Fitzpatrick. He's not the answer. He shouldn't be the only guy. But yeah, I would absolutely take him here to mentor a rookie. I think that would be you couldn't draw it up much better than that. You can't ask for much more than that realistically.
I would agree with you that if you can get into a Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Fitzpatrick situation where you have a guy that you know is going to be your future, then maybe. But I think what's interesting about Fitzpatrick is I think the Fitzmania and the Fitzmagic stuff has sort of made him look better than he actually is throughout his entire career.
Oh, he's totally a meme.
You know, he only has one winning season as a starting quarterback in the NFL for over what? It's been 15 years or something like that.
He rarely plays a full year.
He's only made the playoffs. He was 10-6 season with the Jets in 2015, and that's it.
But how many full seasons? I don't have it in front of me. How many full seasons has he played? He's always either about to get benched or about to come off the bench.
Right. Like, it's also telling you something, right? I mean, I think
but we're not looking for a guy in this situation who's going to lead. Like, I'm not looking for a guy who's going to lead them to a Super Bowl. I'm looking for a guy who's going to help the young quarterback as best he can, so that guy can lead them to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, right? I guess. I think
I'm not bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick to start 16 games.
No, I get that. I think we've overhyped Ryan Fitzpatrick because of the whole thing, the memes, the beard, the look.
No, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I don't disagree, but I'm not bringing him in to start 16 games. I'm bringing him in to start until the bye week. I'm bringing him in as a teacher, and he has that valuable experience, and he's played in so many different systems, and he's seen so much. His experience is invaluable. Like, I'm not I don't really care what he does. Like, he's not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a complete disaster. That's enough for me at that point.
The biggest thing that I had
is getting to the next guy.
The biggest issue I have with Fitzpatrick, and then we're going to move on to the next question, is that he does turn the ball over a whole lot. Now, some of his turnovers are smart turnovers, right? Where it's third and long late in the game. It's a blowout. He's just throwing up arm punts and stuff like that to give his guy a chance. But there's a ton of interceptions on his resume. And the decision-making, I know Cam threw a lot of interceptions last year too, so I don't know how much of that really matters anymore to Bill Belichick, but decision-making, ball security still has to have its day, right? That still has to have its impact on the decision.
Is it worth, I guess my point is, I'm fine taking those turnovers for 2 months if it means your young quarterback you just took in the first round is getting better.
Yeah.
That's I guess that's the point. Can we get to, somebody asked a couple times about Devin McCourty?
Yeah.
Replacement. Because I thought that was a good one, because I think a big issue for the Patriots last year is there were two guys, and this actually goes to another question, because somebody asked about defensive tackles. There were two guys they never fully replaced who flew under the radar, and Deron Harmon and Danny Shelton, who both happened to go to the Lions. Mm-hmm. The Shelton one, they signed Bo Allen. He wasn't healthy, so we can put that to the side. But the Patriots really like being in a base with three safeties, where you have the box safety and then two free safeties, right? And they had Jason McCourty do it at times. They had Jonathan Jones do it at times. Miles Bryant did a little bit at the end of the year, absolutely. But I think there's something to be said about being a true free safety. And that's ironic because Devin McCourty wasn't, but at this point he is. And there is nobody right now. I think, could Duggar do it? Could he play that role next to Devin?
That's the role that he played in college.
Right.
Kyle Duggar was the free safety in college.
Right. But are you getting the most out of him? Are you maximizing his skill set?
Potentially more out of him in that way.
Really?
My worry about Duggar is that you are going to waste him in a lot of games where this is not, there's a lot of teams, and the Patriots played a ton of them last year that had great tight ends, right? They went through a gauntlet of tight ends. They needed that tight end stopper, but it's still a position that's not very deep in the NFL, right? There's probably about 10 guys that you really circle on the game plan on Tuesday that you're worried about going into the game.
Do you know, hang on real quick. I think we did this on another show. I can't remember. Do you know how many tight ends this year, individual tight ends, put up the collective stats of the three Patriots tight ends combined?
Yeah, we did this. It was 30-something?
36,
yeah. So I don't know if there's a ton of tight ends that you're going into every single week, unless you go through a gauntlet schedule like the Patriots just went through, where you're like, who am I going to put on this guy every single week? But the position of free safety and being more like that Devin McCourty type, if Kyle Duggar can give you ball production from back there, if he can actually impact the play with interceptions and pass breakups and ranging over the top like he did in college, and that's a role that can, in theory, be more productive than somebody that's taking the fourth or fifth option in the progression every single week.
But even outside of covering tight ends, he was effective as a pass rusher at times. He was effective stopping.
As a blitzer, personally, I watched him play in college, obviously a ton after they drafted him, especially. And this was a guy that had elite range and ball skills. And he's got such great athleticism and such great hops. He really can vertically jump very high in the air too, that he can really range over the top. And that's what his college coaches, when I spoke to them after they made the pick, they all said, hey, this is a free safety. This is a middle of the field type of guy. This isn't, we didn't really use him in that box role. I can understand he's rocked up. He's huge. I understand why they want to play him there, but I do wonder if they can play him more in the back end a little bit and let him use those skills. Other than that, though, I don't know if Miles Bryant's really a natural fit for that position, because he's so small that you worry, first of all, about range over the top, because he doesn't have the length to make up for it. If he doesn't make a great read on the play, then he's going to be too late to contest the catch point. And then the last thing is really important for Bill Belichick at that position is you're the last line of defense. Right. So if a runner gets through the line of scrimmage and he gets into the third level of the defense, how many times, and whether it's good or bad for the team overall, how many times have we seen Devin McCourty be the guy that brings down the running back before he breaks off? He takes a 25-yard run and Devin McCourty ushers him out of bounds instead of him going 60 yards to the house. And if you have a guy back there in Miles Bryant who's undersized, has struggled a little bit with tackling from what we've seen, that would be my concern, is putting him deep back there. But I don't know if they have a guy like that on the roster. So that is definitely a position where we've all been clamoring for them to take one of those guys to start developing them.
Right. So to go back to that point, kind of the point I was making, and even if you think Kyle Duggar can play that role, wouldn't you rather them have like a traditional second free safety? Like so Duggar can kind of be that wild card.
Is that so? Jonathan Jones and Miles Bryant are two guys that I think belong in the slot, right? I don't think that
I don't think of those guys as like if they're playing back there, they can do it, but they're out of position.
Right.
Like, wouldn't you like to have a guy, essentially Jerron Harmon? I'm saying, like, wouldn't you like them to have another? So, somebody who asked that question, the long answer, getting back to the original question, just to throw a name out there, a guy I like is a safety, Caden Stearns from Texas, to be in the draft. He's not at the Senior Bowl, unfortunately, because none of the defensive players I was super into are at the Senior Bowl. Another gripe. But he's going to come in. He was a special teams player. So right away, he's going to come in and contribute on special teams. But he kind of checks all the boxes you talked about. He can cover a lot of ground. He's a high IQ player. He's a strong tackler for his position. He's not huge, but he's like 6'1". I think he's like 190. He might be pushing 200. That's a guy, and he's going to be there probably in the third round. They might have to move up in the third round to get him, but I'll tell you this for sure. They're trading that third round comp pick. Bill Belichick will not let the Tom Brady pick become one person. That you think the Garoppolo trade tree is nuts. Wait until you see what happens with this pick. So maybe they use that pick, a future pick, they move up. Caden Stearns, long answer to the short question. Who replaces Devin McCourty? I don't know right now. The guy's not on the roster. Caden Stearns out of Texas is definitely somebody to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it stinks that they waited so long at that position, because the guy that I really wanted to put back there is Juan Thornhill, who just balls out for the Chiefs every single week now. And he seemed like the perfect McCourty replacement, the guy that played a little bit of corner and safety in college. Let's talk about Matthew Stafford. We're getting a ton of questions about it. Why would you want Matthew Stafford? I know why I would want Matthew Stafford.
Because he's good.
Yeah.
Because he's good. Do you know how many teams would kill for 2 to 4 years of good quarterback play? Look at the Bears. They've been looking for a good quarterback for 25 years. So the whole concept of getting a quarterback that's going to come in and be dominant for 10 to 15 years, that doesn't happen. You can try it in the draft, and that's certainly fair. That's fine. But you risk going through the roulette. I keep going back to in The Last Dance, right? We all saw The Last Dance this summer, the Chicago Bulls documentary. At the end of it, they talk about how the Bulls fans, it was kind of clear things were coming to an end, and guys were getting hurt all the time, and Jordan was upset and whatever, and the fans said, let's move them all out. Let's start to rebuild. Let's get picks. We want the Bulls to be dominant again as soon as possible. It is 25 years later. The Bulls still suck. Okay? Pushing the rebuild, going just youth, you're not going to hit. You don't hit, you hit less often than you don't. So, you can go that route. And look, at some point, you need to bring in a young quarterback. You don't just want to jump veteran to veteran to veteran. But if you can bring in a guy, and Evan, we talked about this on Tuesday, Matthew Stafford's numbers, his career arc, do not reflect the player he is on tape.
Yeah.
He is a top 10 quarterback in the league. If you have a chance to get that for 2 to 4 years, you take it. Because you could be drafting. See, I'm all fired up. I hit my computer. You could be drafting for 10 to 15 years before you find that guy.
Yeah.
That's why you do it. You essentially, I'll throw the question back at you. If you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, why do you want a 43-year-old Tom Brady for only a year or two? You have your answer. It's happening next Sunday. That's why.
I love the rant. I love it.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong at all. And on top of all of that, we do need to look at Bill Belichick's coaching window here. How much longer he's going to be doing this for. Is it really in Bill's best interest to draft even a Mac Jones who looks pretty polished and wait 3 years for that guy to be good enough to be competitive again, right? Like, is that really the road that you want to go down? So I think that there's a lot of different ways to go about rebuilding. Certainly the young quarterback that gives you the longest runway is the best possible scenario. But like you said, you could bust on one of those guys almost as easily as you could hit on one of them.
More easily.
That's sort of like I would call it right now, because of all the information that we have, a 60-40 proposition, right? 40% chance the guy ends up being good.
Wait, hang on. Can we bring up Gogeta, Cheneretta, whatever that is, that comment about the Buccaneers? The Buccaneers are behind the 8 ball on what?
Yeah.
On what?
Making the Super Bowl.
They're about to win the goal is not, I'm sorry. The goal is not to win 2 to 3 to 4 Super Bowls. That's not that's so unrealistic. The Patriots did that. People don't understand exactly how incredible it was that the Patriots
got Alex ranting and everything now. I'm going to go.
The goal is to win 1. The Buccaneers are not behind the 8 ball on anything. They're about to accomplish their goal. If you win 1 Super Bowl with your core, how many great cores didn't win 1 Super Bowl? If you win 1 Super Bowl with your core, you did it. You did your job. You accomplished your goal. Anything beyond that is extra. The Buccaneers are behind the 8 ball on nothing. The Patriots are behind the 8 ball because they don't have a quarterback. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's a great point. And the one thing that I consistently see out of people that when we talk about these quarterbacks, when we talk about the trade situations, nobody wants to give up anything to get one of these guys. And I'm just, it's honestly mind blowing to me how you guys think.
And we don't know what Jake Dogala can do. I wouldn't trade him.
You guys think that they can, you have to give up something to get something, right? And you're not going to be able to get a good quarterback in the draft or a Matthew Stafford or something like that by just trading pennies, right? You're going to have
a quarterback after Thomas done. We'll also have a Super Bowl ring.
You're going to have to do that, right? You're going to have to. So that's a definite thing that frustrates me is how many people I see out there when you throw out a trade proposal and you say, oh, let's give up 15 for Matthew Stafford. That's way too much. It's not way too much. It's not. I promise you it's not. Okay. Anyways, I like this question. N'Keal Harry and J.C. Jackson, are they both keepers?
Ooh, good question.
J.C. I think is yes, but
so I think
they're both not 100%.
It's kind of 2 separate questions, though, right? I think J.C. Jackson, he's a good player, but is he worth what you're going to have to pay him to keep him around? That's how I interpret that question. So,
right. The question really is with JC is, can they get a deal done this offseason before he hits unrestricted free agency while he's just a restricted free agent that maybe is a little bit more team friendly than what they might have to pay on the open market? If they can get JC Jackson under contract for 4 or 5 years at, $10.5 million per year, which for his side of things is going to be way undervalued, right? They're going to look at it. They're going to put his interception numbers up on the screen, and they're going to say, hey, this is a guy that only Xavier Howard, since he's entered the league, has more interceptions than J.C. Jackson. So he should be up over $15 million a year as a number 1 corner. I don't think that he's that good. I don't think he is a true bona fide number 1 corner. So if I was the Patriots, I would come with that Shaq Mason deal right now. That, very team friendly, but still giving the guy his due, a $10.5 million per year average annual value, and see if they bite. Because I don't know if they will. I think his agent's going to tell him to bet on himself and sign his restricted free agent tender, which will probably be, I would say probably even a first round tender to make sure that he doesn't get signed away as an RFA. And his agent's going to want him to go hit the open market next offseason. J.C. Jackson might want his money. This is a guy that's come from some interesting upbringing. He's been around the block. He went to Florida, then he went to Maryland. He hasn't had the easiest path. Undrafted free agent. You pay that guy $10.5 million. That's making it, right? That's right. A very different conversation than maybe somebody like a Stephon Gilmore who was a top 10 pick and had that pedigree with him. So J.C. Jackson, I would say yes at the right price. N'Keal Harry is the real interesting question for me though, because
real quick on Jackson,
yeah.
I can see them treating him like they treated Malcolm Butler in that he was good enough. He was good enough to be a number 1 cornerback, but not like to use a baseball analogy, like he was a number 1 starter, but he wasn't an ace.
Yeah.
Right. Is what Malcolm Butler was. And I think J.C. Jackson's kind of in that same boat. So they kind of strung Butler along as long as they could until you got a true ace cornerback in free agency in Stephon Gilmore. And then they paid that guy. I don't have it in front of me. I don't know, in 2 years who the top free agent corner is scheduled to be, whatever. But I could kind of see them doing the same thing with JC and stringing him along. And if he wants to take the team friendly deal, sure. But if he doesn't, you string him along until you get whoever the next Stephon Gilmore is that next. Because these corners, they all want to hit the market. They rarely sign extensions. You go find that guy and then you pay that guy. And ideally, at that point, you have a quarterback on a rookie contract and you can kind of spend a little more money. So that's how I see Jackson.
Yeah. So N'Keal Harry, I hope, and this is no disrespect to N'Keal, but I hope the Patriots recognize the mistake and replace N'Keal Harry's role on the roster, because all they're doing by not doing that is just kind of running it back and in a situation where they're just not allowing themselves to admit that they were wrong about the player and move on. It's hurting the team, honestly, in the short and the long term, to not replace N'Keal Harry with a guy that I think N'Keal Harry can have a role as a fourth or fifth wide receiver. Maybe you bring him in certain packages for his size and for his blocking ability. But you have to recognize that this is not a true bona fide X receiver like you thought he was going to be, and you got to upgrade at that spot.
So I think N'Keal Harry, and let me explain this before everybody freaks out. N'Keal Harry, I think, is kind of the Patriots' version of Andrew Benintendi. And I know Benintendi had a couple of good years, but basically, like, he collapsed last year, right? Really over the last year and a half. And the reason is the analytics people got to him, and basically, you know, Andrew Benintendi's a double hitter. That's what he does. And they said either hit home runs or don't. And he can't, and he just strikes out all the time. So he's being asked something to do. He's being asked to do something he can't do, and it's making him look like a bad player. I don't think N'Keal Harry's like an all-pro. I don't think he's as bad as the tape suggests in New England, because I think he's being asked to do a lot of what he can't do. I think it's just going to come down to a change of scenery.
They got it figured out a little bit towards the end of last
year. A little bit, but like, I think at this point, it's past the point of no return. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes somewhere and becomes like a 40-catch, 600-yard, 5-touchdown wide receiver. Like, I think a change, he'd have to go to the right place. I'm not saying it's going to automatically happen, but, you know, I think he just needs a change of scenery at this point. I think it's beyond the point of no return in New England. Can we go back to like two questions back to back real quick? I really liked.
Sure.
Somebody asked about the linebackers and if Hightower leaves, and the Penn State guy, I'm blanking on the name, who you really like.
Penn State, Micah Parsons?
Micah Parsons. So I would just say to that, I like Parsons, but I'll tell you this, because I don't think that they might not go there at 15. Here's the question. Another guy to watch from Missouri is a guy named Nick Bolton. And he's right now end of the first, early second round pick, but he's the kind of middle linebacker they love. Smart, strong tackler, runs downhill, fills gaps, plays with conviction. He's not going to give you a ton in coverage, but he's going to be a factor, play in and play out in the run game. And then you have kind of a more athletic guy in Terez Hall, who you can pair with him. So I don't know. Parsons, I think he ends up going in the top 10. I do. I think he's going to be out of the Patriots' reach, but I like your line of thinking. I do think middle linebacker is a realistic conversation for them early in the draft. So look up Nick Bolton from Missouri, another guy who's not at the Senior Bowl, by the way, but is a good player, and I would encourage Patriots fans to become familiar with.
It would make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the Patriots have gone Dante Hightower, Gerard Mayo. They've obviously addressed that position early in the draft. Right. But from a value standpoint, a middle linebacker in the first round, especially in the top 15, unless it's a Micah Parsons type of player that's going to come in and be able to make that kind of an impact, that's a high pick for a middle linebacker. But at the same time, Micah Parsons is a really good player. You mentioned Nick Bolton, who's a little bit undersized, but I like him too. Zaven Collins, though, from Tulsa, that's the type of guy that I could really see them liking. He's 6'4", 260 pounds. And he's athletic, and he can move too, and he can play on and off the line of scrimmage. His sort of, I don't know if he's going to be the athlete in terms of testing that Jamie Collins was, but his kind of play and archetype is a lot like Jamie Collins's was. So he's a raw guy, but he's extremely, extremely talented and physically gifted. So I could definitely see them liking a guy like Zaven Collins. I think Nick Bolton is going to be down their board just a little bit. I think he's only like 235 pounds. So
yeah, I feel like with that stuff though, like you get a guy into an NFL locker room and he's going to bulk up right away. Like I think the size thing, it's a fair point. I think the size thing is a little bit overrated. Somebody in the chat, Caden Stearns, we already talked about him, like him. Yeah. I'll give you one more. If they want to wait until day 2, maybe early day 3, this is a guy at the Senior Bowl whose value can really fluctuate here, is Patty Fisher from Northwestern. First off, great name. Great name. Second of all, he was supposed to be a first-round pick last year. He did have kind of a down season, but 6'4", 246. So that's maybe a little small in the weight, but that's kind of in your size range there. And I mean, he's a Northwestern linebacker. Like, he's highly intelligent, multi-year starter. He's been a captain.
Are you saying that everybody that goes to Northwestern is highly intelligent just because it's a good school?
I mean, isn't that's the stereotype, isn't it? No, but no, he is he's a middle linebacker. He's a traditional middle linebacker, football IQ guy, run stopper. Again, he was this time last year. If he'd have been in last year's draft, he probably would have been a first-round pick. Now they're talking about him 3rd or 4th because he had a rough year. That's something where maybe Belichick looks at that and he sees the tape and he realizes that last year was an anomaly and maybe he can get a first-round talent late in day 2. So that's another guy, and a guy you can watch at the Senior Bowl too, Patty Fisher, who I like for them. And then there was one other linebacker question there. Somebody asked like 4 times, so I feel like we should get it in. Michael Pinnicky, the practice squad linebacker.
Oh, yeah, practice squad linebacker. He had a really good career at Miami. I don't know if he's going to be a player that we're going to circle as somebody that is going to have a future in New England, but maybe he's a pretty good athlete. I remember him being able to run pretty well. So maybe like as a special teams depth linebacker type of role, I think has got to be what they have in mind for him, and the reason why he's sticking around.
Yeah, I have no take on him. I mean, he got popped for PEDs, didn't he?
Yes, he did. But he's a good size guy. Can run well. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if he has a future on defense necessarily, but maybe on special teams defense type of role where he's playing on 4th downs and stuff like that. A couple more questions here before we sign off.
Do you have one specifically, or because I got?
I wanted to talk about the free agent wide receivers because I'm interested to hear this question here from Steven is just your favorite for the Patriots in the free agent wide receiver market.
Oh, I thought you were going to go first.
You go first because I got one that I think is going to surprise you.
Okay. I see is a cop-out answer. It depends who the quarterback is. Like that's okay. Some of it to me.
Let's assume that the quarterback is. I don't know. That's a good point.
So here's the thing. Like if you get Stafford, like I'm really into the idea of reuniting Stafford and Kenny Golladay.
Yeah, I think that's something that Stafford would be really into too. Right. Golladay sometimes has a little bit of an injury history, right?
So he does. So, okay, here's how I'll answer that question. You can spend, what's it going to cost to get Allen Robinson per year?
About like 20 million.
20 million, right? So I would rather get like a $15 and a $5 million receiver and have those 2 guys than Allen Robinson. Like I think they need more than one guy. So I don't know if that's a favorite, but like I'm not all in on getting the top guy. Like I want 2 instead of one amazing guy. I want a great guy and a good guy. Like that's more where I'm at. I'll throw this in too real quick because we talked about this on Tuesday. Golladay would be a cool reunion with Matthew Stafford. The other one, and he's not the end all be all, but if you really want to make Matthew Stafford happy, you get one of his favorite all-time, not his favorite all-time receiver from the pros because it's Calvin Johnson, but you get of late his favorite wide receiver on one side in Kenny Golladay and his top target his last year in college in AJ Green on the other.
I don't know if they can afford both those guys because AJ Green.
How much money is AJ Green really going to command though?
Because it's the name brand, right? It's the name brand. The name brand's worth $8 million coming off the. But
it's not worth as much in a year where the position's so strong.
And it's also an interesting year. I think what the more fascinating thing is the top guys are going to get paid, right? Everybody at the top of the free agent class is going to get paid.
That's a good one. But
those secondary guys, though, the tier 3, tier 2 guys, there's not going to be enough money left over for those guys to hit the jackpot in their contracts. So I think there is going to be a lot of veteran players that are signing like 1 year low, $9-10 million contracts that might surprise some people that they're not getting that big payday just because of the cap. I
am all for the Patriots doing with Calvin Johnson, with the Bucs did with Rob Gronkowski. And I don't know if I'm kidding when I say that. Who was your guy?
So here's my guy, and then we're going to sign off. Will Fuller. And I know that people are going to, I knew you were going to react like that.
It's just like, he's kind of anime.
Oh no.
No, but like,
don't say that.
Wouldn't you rather like
say he's injury prone before you say he's meh?
He's ad. Like I can't get excited about it. I'm not saying he's not a good player. It doesn't get me going.
Right. So the reason why it gets me going is because I have been waiting, clamoring, whatever word you want to use, for the Patriots to get some sort of outside speed and explosiveness, right? Something outside the numbers from a guy that can win over the top of the defense, which they haven't really had since Brandon Cooks, and that was only 1 year. So they really haven't had it for a long period of time since, I guess, like Randy Moss, and even only that was only a couple seasons. So somebody on the outside who can really threaten the coverage vertically up the field, because I think the issue that I see with the Kenny Galladays and with the Allen Robinsons of the world, as great players as those guys are, they're not taking the top off the defense to make it easier for the guys at the intermediate and the short level of the field. So you have a player in Jacoby Myers who may not be as good as Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay, but I think he can play. right? I think he can be a top 3 receiver in your depth chart. And the issue is that you got nobody that's creating speed over the top, none. And if you don't have that, then every single team is just going to be all over your receivers within 20 yards. And there's not going to be any threat to the defense to take the safety deep. And to me, that I think is going to be something that they need, because they don't necessarily need the possession receiver. I think that they do have a guy in Jacoby who can be that possession receiver between the numbers and especially out of the slot. What about that vertical threat, that outside X vertical threat? Who is that going to be? I think maybe it could be a guy like a Will Fuller. If not, I like Corey Davis a lot too. I think he's a different style of player, certainly, than a guy like Will Fuller. Is not as good as a vertical route runner, but he can definitely win on the outside. So maybe that will be an answer for him. But I do like the idea of going in that tier 2, tier 3. I don't see the need to pay Allen Robinson. He's a great player, but I think that's going to tie up way too much of your cap. I loved all these questions. It was a great discussion, Alex. We will definitely be back next week, same time, same place, same Q&A style. We'll do exactly what we did here today, and we'll be back on the traditional podcast on Tuesday as well. Full Senior Bowl recap. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. We did a bunch of that on our Tuesday show this week, so be sure to check that out from earlier in the week if you want to get all your Tom Brady and Super Bowl talk there. It is for you. And until next time, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for listening.